How did Srividya evolve beyond the Purva Kaula and the Uttara Kaula stages of the Tantric tradition?
So, as Sri Lakshmidharacharya mentions, the Purva Kaula Yoga Sadhana spread to various regions, especially in South India. Over time, however, this practice was fine-tuned to align with the principles of what came to be known in later days as Srividya Paddhati. The focus, we might say, shifted towards a more refined approach. The intense internal discipline and the use of the Sri Chakra were gradually integrated into the Srividya Upasana Krama, making it more systematic and focused on inner spiritual realization. He refers to this tradition as Samayacara. However, it came to be known as Purva Samayacara later, with further development and shifts in this system, when the practice gradually shifted from being more internal to becoming more external in its worship. So in the Purva Samayachara, the worship of the goddess started to take a more defined shape, particularly as the Srividya Paradevata, Sri Mahatripura Sundari and the Sri Chakra were introduced into Kundalini Sadhana. This is where Sri Mahatripura Sundari came to be worshipped as Kundalini Shakti, the inner energy that resides within the body of the sadhaka or practitioner and is awakened through intense spiritual discipline. Additionally, the Sri Chakra is considered to be established within the human body itself, symbolizing the internal manifestation of the divine geometry that corresponds to the spiritual ascent of the practitioner. The Purva Samayachara practice itself was a Kundalini sadhana that worked with the Panchadashi Bijas, connecting them to the Adhara Chakras and the different Avaranas or enclosures of the Sri Chakra, and also included the use of Matrikaksharas, that is, the divine seed syllables of the alphabet. Back in those days, this Samayamarga was a serious, intense practice, something the sadhakas, that is the practitioners, lived and breathed as part of their everyday life. And not only that, by this point, both the earlier Kaula traditions, I mean the older traditions of Purva Kaula and Uttara Kaula, were seen in a more critical light and ultimately discarded as practices not suitable for serious spiritual pursuit. Maybe the reason is that by then the original Veera Sadhana with the Panchamakaras had completely fallen into decline, perhaps even desecrated beyond recognition. I shall just quote a verse from Subhagodaya Stotra, which is ascribed to Sri Gaudapadacharya as its composer. Ataste kaulaste bhagavati dridhaprakrita jana iti prahuhu prajñāha kulasamaya margadvaya vidah mahantas sevante sakala janani baindava grihe shivakaram nityam amrita jharikam aindava kalam. That is, these Kaula worshippers are considered Prakrita, that is of a lower nature, Dridha Prakrita Jana. Idi Prahuhu Prajñāha Kulasamaya Margadvaya Vidah. This is how scholars well versed in both the Kaula and Samaya Marga, the two paths, describe them. Mahantah sevante sakala janani baindava grihe shivakaram nityam amrita jharikam aindava kalam. However, highly evolved Samayachara practitioners worship the divine goddess Sri Tripura Sundari, who is the universal mother, Sakala Janani, Shiva Swarupini, and Amrita Jharika, Amrita Pravaha Rupa. she is worshipped as Kundalini Shakti in her lunar form, Aindava Kala or Indu Kala Swarupa, within the Sahasrara, which corresponds to the Bindu Mandala of Sri Chakra. This is the meaning of this Subhagodaya Stuti verse. In other words, the practitioner awakens Kundalini Shakti as the divine goddess Sri Tripurasundari herself, raises Kundalini upward to Sahasrara, merges that Shakti into Paramashiva, and worships that state known as Sadhakhya Tattva, aligning that Sadhakhya Tattva to the Bindu Mandala of Sri Chakra inside his body. What is this Sadhakhya Tattva? It is a term from the Purva Kaula tradition, and it refers to that ultimate state when Kundalini Shakti reaches the crown chakra, that is the Sahasrara. Now, when that happens, something truly profound takes place. The sadhaka experiences a shower of nectar, amrita, that spreads throughout all the nadis, the subtle energy channels of the body. Now, this nectar shower is not just some poetic metaphor. It is a real experiential phenomenon described in the scriptures and by those great sadhakas who have actually undergone this awakening. In Sahasrara, there is what we call Bindu, the source of this nectar, which is associated with the lunar essence. When Kundalini reaches this point, it triggers the release of this ambrosial energy and it starts flowing downward, nourishing and energizing every chakra. And what is the result of this? A state of immense bliss, a kind of divine intoxication where all boundaries of the individual self begin to dissolve. The sadhaka no longer feels separate from the universe. It is like merging into that infinite presence of Shakti and Shiva in complete union. That is why this is considered the peak of spiritual awakening in the Purva Samaya Marga of Sri Vidya. It is not just about energy movement, it is about realizing oneness with the Supreme. It is the culmination of the sadhaka's journey where the realization dawns that the individual self and the Supreme are one. This is called Aikyānusandhāna. That is the realization of the essential oneness of the individual self, Jiva, with the Supreme Parashakti. This is what is known as Antarika Samaya Upasana. It is performed in a systematic manner, aligning with the Tithis, the 15 lunar days. The Subhagodaya Stuti gives a detailed account of this sadhana. Just to give you a sense of it, let me quote and explain a verse from Subhagodaya Stuti. Now, some of these details might sound a bit technical or even a little obscure, but I still want to share them so we can appreciate how seriously and systematically this entire sadhana pathadi was followed by those sincere aspirants of the ancient Purva Samayacara tradition. Kalayaha shodashyaha pradiphalita bimbena sahidam tadiyai piyushaihi punaradhigamapla chitatanuhu. Now, what does this mean? The Shodashi Kala of the Devi, known as Sada, manifests within the Adhara chakras, reflecting the 15 Tithis, the lunar days. As a result, an excess of nectar, Amrita, flows from the lunar sphere, that is Chandramandala, saturating the sadhaka's entire being. Site pakshe sarvas thithaya iha krishne picha sama yadacha amavasya bhavati nahi puja samayinam. That is, in the bright fortnight, Shukla Paksha, this process takes place And the same continues in the dark fortnight, Krishna Paksha, also for all tithis. However, on Amavasya, new moon, this does not occur. Hence, for practitioners of Samayachara, worship is prohibited on Amavasya. Going further, the text explains that the sun and the moon move along the Ida and Pingala nadis respectively. Idayam Pingalyam Charata Ihatau Surya Shashinau. As they traverse, there comes a moment when they meet and merge at the Mooladhara Chakra. Sa Titihi Ama. This exact conjunction is what is referred to as Amavasya Tithi, that is the new moon phase. At this point, darkness engulfs the Mooladhara, described as Tamasi Adhare, meaning the base center Mooladhara is enveloped in obscurity. Since the solar radiance does not reach the lunar sphere at the Ajna Chakra during Amavasya, the divine nectar ceases to flow, causing the nadis to dry up. This disruption in the nectar stream also affects Kundalini Shakti, as her awakening is closely linked to the flow of Amrita. That is why in Samayachara, worship is strictly prohibited on Amavasya, because the very process that sustains the subtle energy movement is hindered on this particular lunar day. What a complicated process and how obscurely it has been explained, right? Definitely, without the guidance of a competent guru, undertaking such an intense sadhana is totally impossible. The entire Subhagodaya Stuti, consisting of about 50 or 52 verses, elaborates extensively on these intricate practices of this Purva Samayachara sadhana only. So, this practice basically involves Kundalini sadhana, where the 15 Bija mantras of Panchadashi mantra, along with the corresponding Matrika letters, are aligned with different lunar phases, tithis, various Adhara chakras within the body, and the Avaranas of the Sri Chakra. Moreover, the Bindu Sthana, the central point of Sri Chakra, holds immense significance, as it is where the divine presence of the Supreme Goddess of Sri Vidya, Sri Tripura Sundari, is realized. Thus, we can surmise that the deeply intricate and serious yoga sadhana of the Purva Kaula Tantrikas, along with the spiritual accomplishment it likely resulted in, drew the early Sri Vidya sadhakas to develop their own internal practice of worshipping the Divine Mother, Sri Tripura Sundari. They incorporated this into their system of worship known as Samayachara, which came to be known as the right-hand path or Dakshina Marga, which stood in stark contrast to the despised left-hand path, Vama Marga. As you may be familiar with, there are two specific namas, two names in the Sri Lalita Sahasranama Stotra, Antarmukha Samaradhya and Bahirmukha Sudurlabha. The name Antarmukha Samaradhya here indicates that the Divine Mother must be worshipped internally with great seriousness and discipline. Samaradhya. The practice of worshipping her internally is essential, as she is nearly impossible to reach through external means. Bahirmukha Sudurlabha.